Hey guys, and welcome to all the ecstatic Indian fans, the depressed England fans, and everyone in between. And of course, we're joined by Aaron, the Cricket Connoisseur, probably one of the more depressed England fans, I would assume. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Faizan. Yeah, obviously a disappointing result the other day, but at the end of the day, I'm a cricket fan first and foremost. And may I just say, what a game of Test match cricket that was. And India thoroughly deserved to win that off the back of that day five performance, which I imagine we'll go into in a lot more depth in today's show, Faizan. But a brilliant, brilliant advert for the game. I know it's very, very cliche. We say that about every Test match. Same with the West Indies and Pakistan the other day in Kingston. But it just had everything, didn't it? Had absolutely everything. I mean, some poor weather, some bad light, and then we had some fantastic, on-field theatrics. We saw some brilliant knocks from the likes of Cheteshwar Pujara, Joe Root, for example, with 180 not out. Some excellent bowling on day five from Mohammad Siraj and Jasprit Bumrah. So, yeah, a lot to unpack. I mean, it was a fantastic victory, a famous victory for India. And for England now, I'm going to be honest, it's kind of thrown the cat in amongst the pigeons. And yeah, we'll discuss that at length in today's show. I imagine so, Faizan.
Yeah, we will. We will. Let's get into the first Test match first, then, because there's quite a bit to unpack. And obviously, the first thing was, no Crawley, Hamid came in and at three, and I don't think that was going to solve England's batting woes, and it didn't, because I think it's kind of at the moment it's just I don't know how to best describe it, except the top three just look as frail as anything. Unfortunately, Burns and Sibley as well at the top. And if you are 0 for 2, which in one of the innings they were, which I think was a record, I think that's the first time at Lord's ever that the two openers have been dismissed for a duck, if I'm not mistaken as well. So another unwanted stat, then, it's not great going for England, to be honest with you. But the first decision, I guess, is England winning the toss and opting to bowl first. What did you think of that decision?
Well, to be honest, I think we were influenced by overhead conditions. I think that as well. And to be fair, looking at the pitch, it didn't actually look that flat on day one. I think it just got flatter as the actual Test match progressed. So, personally, I actually wasn't too against that decision. And of course, in the end, I mean, it ended up being a fantastic Test match. So I don't necessarily think the decision to bowl was necessarily wrong. What I will say, though, and I should have mentioned this right at the start, KR Rahul, Kanor Lakesh Rahul played that role to absolute perfection. Him and Rohit Sharma on what was basically an incredibly tough day for batting, overcast conditions. As I said, there was a little bit of grass at Lord's as well. The ball was coming on very, very nicely. Some good movement from the likes of James Anderson and Sam Curran as well, and Ollie Robinson, of course, who I imagine we'll also discuss about his bowling performances. Been very, very good for the 3 lines and a crown. But I feel like the way in which they just, applied themselves. I think that's a good way of describing it. It's not just having the technique and the temperament. It's about knowing when to actually utilise that during a game. And I feel like Kara Hall in particular, someone who we know is very free-flowing, very elegant, very, very aesthetically pleasing, I'd say, as a batsman, kind of reined himself in a bit and got off to a really, really slow start. And as he began to understand the conditions a bit more, as he became a bit more accustomed to the surface, the actual type of bowling he was facing, he began to generate some rhythm, some confidence into his batting. And he produced a masterful century, and deservedly so. Deserves to be on that Lord's Honours board. It was absolutely magnificent to watch. A typically majestic and graceful innings, courtesy of the Karnataka opener. But I think in terms of England's decision to bowl, I don't necessarily think that is the issue in this Test match. I think we all know what's coming. It was the batting. Yet again, and I have some strong opinions on that, because I'm going to be honest, I feel like the management of certain players, Dom Sibley is one of them, has been absolutely pathetic at times. And I don't mind saying that. I mean, you look at 2019, this is a pattern in English cricket, and it's a pattern which I absolutely despise. But we like scapegoating certain players. I think back to the 2019 Ashes, and you had Moeen Ali, and his face was plastered all over the papers and social media. He was the villain of the England cricket team. In 2020 to early 2021, Dom Bess, and going out being fed to the Sharks in Ahmedabad, and again, his name is printed all over the newspapers and in the media. And in 2021, it's been Dom Sibley. When he walked out to bat at Lord's, I've never seen him like that in 4 years. I've been watching Dom Sibley week in, week out for Warwickshire since 2017. I've never, ever seen him like that. body language was all over the place. You could tell he wanted to be absolutely nowhere near those 22 yards. And the reason behind that is poor management. I also think it's ridiculous scrutiny to the point of where it's absolutely, it's ludicrous. To be honest, people call him the worst batsman ever to grace English cricket. Useless, this, that, the other. You don't watch him week in, week out like I do, and many other Warwickshire fans do in the County Championship. And to be honest, the treatment of Dom Sibley this year, bear in mind that last year we were all singing his praises, 2020 Wisden English Men's Cricketer of the Year in Test cricket. To have seen the downward spiral of his career and the treatment of Dom Sibley has been absolutely devastating. So to be honest, Faizan, yes, the decision to bowl, you could argue maybe in hindsight wasn't great. I personally had no issue with that. The issue that I do have is the batting, though. And again, we'll get into that in today's show. As you can tell, pretty strong views on it, to say the least.
Yeah, no worries at all. No worries. I mean, it's an interesting one. We'll dive into that, I think, in more depth. But I want to start off with KL Rahul because you mentioned him. And obviously someone who, let's be honest, is probably India's fourth choice opener, potentially. I mean, they've got Rohit Sharma, Prithvi Shaw, Shubman Gill, Mayank Agarwal. Yeah. So fifth, actually, sorry. It is crazy to think about the depth that India have at their possession, to be honest with you. It's just incredible. But KL Rahul seen as someone who is more of a white ball specialist, comes out there, scores quickly. But people forget that in 2018, obviously at the Oval, he scored 100 in the UK. So clearly does have the aptitude to play Test cricket. I mean, I think he averages just over 30 or kind of around about that. So clearly, the Test matches he has played, he's performed to a decent level. But I thought this was, as you said, a really, really impressive knock. One which I thought was not just skill, it was more application and patience. And it took a lot, I think, of a mental fortitude as well to, let's be honest, he's just come, from, he hasn't played a Test match in a while. And since then, he's been playing a lot of white ball stuff. To switch that off, that they didn't really have any touring games. Then they had an inter-squad game. That's it. And intra-squad game even. And KL Rahul just came out and scored 129. Like, it was easy, basically. And that first wicket stand of 126, and you're just thinking India are going to run away with this. Fair play to England in the way that they managed to, I think, get back into the match, because it looked like at one point it was going to be completely a washout, really, and not because of the weather, but because of how well India were playing. So I think it's worth noting how well he played, and obviously him and Rohit Sharma. But I guess sticking to that first innings, so I think it's quite a good place to stay is Ollie Robinson, and you mentioned him, and obviously Anderson was a big plus because he was a doubt for the Test match, and I was actually quite surprised to see him basically rock up in the starting 11. I thought they're not going to risk him because he was 50-50. And I thought if he pulls his, I think was his groin or thigh that was tight. And I said, if he pulls that halfway through the Test match, they are absolutely screwed because they don't have the depth. They don't have a Stokes to rely on. They've got 5 bowlers and that's really it. So, but he was phenomenal. I mean, 5 for in the first innings, Anderson, and obviously in the second innings, which the reason why I want to hold back on the India second innings is because there were some interesting tactics deployed, which I know there's been a lot of talk about. But Anderson 5, I mean, he was at his best in that first innings, and Ollie Robinson obviously bowled well as well. First of all, I mean, James Anderson, we know how good he is, but a couple of words on him. And also, Ollie Robinson, let's be honest, I mean, it's been a very, very impressive start to his international career. It was funny, I talked to Usher the other day about Jaden Seals for West Indies, and he said that the impact that Jaden Seals has had for West Indies in only one Test match is quite similar to Ollie Robinson, in the sense that Ollie Robinson pretty much just broke on, and he didn't need any kind of feel into the side. It was hit the ground running, get wickets. And I mean, how impressive has that been?
Well, it has. And Faizan, I suppose I will just start with Jimmy Anderson. Okay, an absolute legend. In my opinion, purely because of longevity, purely because of mastery of the art of swing bowling, he is my favourite ever seen bowler. The fact that in this test match, a guy at the age of 39 years of age, and he is still making absolute mincemeat of some of the world's best batting lineups is mind-blowing. I'm beginning to run out of adjectives and superlatives to describe Jimmy Anderson as a cricketer. And also in this test match, to become the third leading test wicket taker of all time, surpassing the great Anil Kumble, an absolute legend, 619 wickets for India, one of my absolute all-time favourite spinners, is nothing short of exceptional. It's glorious. He will always be remembered in the wonderful game of cricket. So Jimmy Anderson, as you said, I didn't expect him to play, purely because I think back to 2019 with the Ashes at Edgbaston. Again, he was questionable for that one. England risked it, and then we all know how that ended with regards to Jimmy not playing for the next few tests. But no, in this test match, brilliant. Vintage James Anderson. I mean, people will always doubt him and say, oh, he relies on overcast conditions, this, that, the other. But my goodness, the boy can bowl. He really can. He is the finest thing ever to come out of Burnley. So Jimmy Anderson, brilliant. And then, of course, another massive positive from this test for England is, of course, Ollie Robinson. And for those who have seen this guy for Sussex, you'll know he's been doing this for absolutely years. I think back to the 2020, the Bob Willis Trophy. He played 2 games for Sussex and finished as their second leading wicket taker. He took 14 wickets in 2 games. 14 wickets. Jack Carson played all 5 of their games. He was the top wicket taker for the Martlets. He finished on 15 wickets. So in 2 games, Ollie Robinson was basically averaging 7 wickets a game, which is staggering. He's so prolific. And I likened him on another show, a little bit, not like for like to Carl Jamieson, but that style of bowler, because he's tall, he's intimidating, got a good bouncer, can swing it both ways, and he's just an absolute nuisance. And the way in which he's just seamlessly integrated into this English bowling lineup is massively, massively positive. Imagine a seam quartet of him, Chris Wokes, Jimmy Anderson, and Stuart Broad, with Ben Stokes added in for the Ashes. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So Ollie Robinson, massive, massive positive, excellent once more in this test match. And to be honest, the future looks very, very bright for him. He really does. He possesses all of the skills necessary to really exceed in test cricket.
Yeah, agreed. I think he's a different type of bowler to what England have had in quite some time. They've got the pace of Archer and Wood. Archer, of course, I think it's a bit harsh to say he's just a pace bowler, but, you know, that's kind of, I'll put him in that bracket just for the sake of this. And then we've got Anderson, obviously, who moves the ball around a lot. And Broad, who, you know, I think is a seam bowler. So I get a bit similar to Ollie Robinson, but Ollie Robinson is different, I think, in his style. He is. He's one of those guys who puts on the back of a length and he gets it to nibble both ways. He's a very intelligent bowler. He sets batsmen up so well. I remember he actually significantly said how he would get Kane Williamson out before one of the test matches against New Zealand, and he did exactly that. And that, I think, to me, proves the cricket IQ that he possesses, which is very important, I think, because it's not just about your talent, it's about how you utilize it. And I think he utilizes it really, really well. On England then, so I think I'm going to dive into a little bit of the batting side for England, and then we can touch upon India's bowling as well, which I thought was quite impressive. Mohammad Siraj, especially, as you can see in the background, they're celebrating, cartwheeling off into the sunset with his 1 wicket. Burns obviously got 49 one in the innings, and then the second one, which I said was that infamous kind of both openers getting out for a duck, a 4-ball duck actually, to be exact, both of them, Burns and Sibley, which was a record. But that first innings, Burns got 49, Sibley 11, and then Hamid really missed a straight one, which is probably the worst start that he could have had, to be honest with you, after coming back into the fold. And it's just one of those things. And as a batsman, I can relate to it. It happens. And when it happens on the first baller, it's just, you know, sometimes you just had to say, you know, I just didn't see it properly because, you know, I switched off for a second and that's it. And it's over. But, I mean, Joe Root, I actually posted something on all my social media saying Joe Root has pretty much carried England for the whole of 2021. There's actually a stat that shows he scored more runs in this India series, right, which has been 1 test match, than the rest of the England batsmen individually. So no one scored more runs than him than he has in this test match, which is ridiculous for the whole of the year. So there's clearly something wrong with the batting for England, and I think it's quite difficult to put exactly a finger on it. But I guess let's start with the openers, because I think that's where there's been a lot of talk about, and you were talking about Dom Sibley. So I'll let you run with it. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's not ideal, is it? Let's be honest. I mean, it has been the centre of a lot of debate when it comes to England at the moment, in particular the top three. And let's face it, I mean, right now, I hate to say it, but I mean, that probably is one of the best top threes that England can produce in terms of Chris Silverwood's selection policy. Don't get me wrong, there are loads of quality batsmen in county cricket right now. The likes of Tom Haynes from Sussex, for example, Alex Lees up at Durham, Jake Libby for Worcestershire. But then again, there just seems to be this thing right now where it has to be former England players are just slotting back into the lineup. The likes of Bairstow, the likes of Moeen Ali. We'll get into Dawid Malan as well, just coming straight back in. It's like 2017 all over again. I'm expecting Mark Stoneman and Tom Wesley and Toby Rowland-Jones to come in for the fourth test match. But for me right now, I mean, it's a shame, obviously. I, as many people know, I'm a massive fan of Dom Sibley. I made that very, very clear at the start of the show. I've watched this guy rack up runs for fun. He pretty much got us single-handedly promoted in 2018 from Division 2 and kept us up in 2019 with 1,244 runs. The only batsman in County Championship Division 1 to score over 1,000 runs. So for those calling him useless, the worst batsman to ever grace English cricket, the worst player they've ever witnessed, the Dom Sibley that we've seen for England is not the Dom Sibley you see at Warwickshire. And to be honest, of course you put some of that on Sibley himself, because he's allowed himself to buy into that system. But to be honest, I also think some of it does rely on Silverwood as well, because it's quite obvious he's got a defined niche in that side to be the ball sponge. Go in there, survive, soften up the new ball, allow the likes of Joe Root, Zach Crawley, Bairstow, Ali, Butler, whoever's in the middle order, to come in and have a slightly easier time of it. That isn't what he does for Warwickshire. He doesn't take 100 balls to reach 30 or 40. Don't get me wrong, he is a patient accumulator of runs, but he's not that limited. But in Test cricket, that is what we've seen. And that's what I think is actually producing that. I think it's the system that Dom Sibley is in at the moment. He's taken his role a little bit too literally. And then, of course, when you factor in all of the outside noise, and it has been absolutely ridiculous. I've said this already. You paint him out as though he's this supervillain of English cricket, when he's not the only one scoring runs. When you look at this year, Faizan, you mentioned that stat. I think Dom Sibley, in terms of English run scorers, in a year where he's been averaging around 20, is still third or fourth highest on there, which says it all. This is not on Dom Sibley. And you can say he's limited, you can say he's not good enough for Test cricket, and of course you can have that opinion. There's no issue about that. But I'm fed up with the continuous scapegoating of certain players. And you can see it. If you put in England cricket or England versus India, one person's face pops up more than anybody else, and it's Dom Sibley walking off at Lord's. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's clear that people have got an agenda against him, and again, that's up for those people to convey. But it doesn't help. That is our opening batsman. I've mentioned this already. One of our most prolific run scorers last year. He's clearly got the temperament for Test cricket, but I just don't feel like he's got the confidence at the moment. And he doesn't. He looked absolutely shot to pieces. And I suppose another issue with regards to English batting isn't just the personnel. You have to question the coaching. These players in 2019 were lauded as the next generation of English cricketers. We built an entire team around the likes of Dom Sibley, Ollie Pope, Zach Crawley, Dan Lawrence. These really impressive, bright talents in county cricket. And they've just been given up on. They've been given up on. Crawley's no longer in the team. Sibley's no longer in the team. Pope has struggled with injury, fair enough. Lawrence was ejected from the team in 2020. Chris Silverwood's grand vision for 2021 to 2023, which is what we were all led to believe would happen, is no longer coming to fruition. And we're now going back to the likes of Dan Malan, Johnny Bairstow, Moeen Ali. We're not thinking long term. And that must be playing on the minds of these players. When you are constantly reminded, the likes of Burns, Sibley, Hamid, Crawley, the English top three is never good enough. They're not quite Strauss, Cook and Trott. How much extra pressure is that building on these guys' shoulders? The likes of Sibley and Hamid, for example, aren't even 25 years of age, for goodness sake. They're still learning their trade in this game. And yes, they aren't the next Virat Kohli. They aren't the next Kane Williamson. I mean, Hamid could be up there because he has got a fantastic technique. But to keep on pigeonholing these players and keep on, what to say, mercilessly scrutinising them, doesn't help. And yes, they may be limited in comparison to likes of an Alistair Cook, England's all-time leading run scorer, but they have got there for a reason. And this is the issue now that I see with England. The vision's gone. It's gone. And we're seeing that with the selection for the third test. Honestly, Faizan, if you told me this in 2019, we wouldn't see Sibley, we wouldn't see Lawrence, we wouldn't see Pope, we wouldn't have seen Hamid, for example, we wouldn't have seen any of these young players in an England shirt, I'll be thinking, what on earth has gone wrong? I mean, we finished fourth in the Test Championship. That wasn't too bad. Yes, we're not exactly challenging the likes of India or New Zealand, who are absolutely exceptional, leagues above England right now, but it's not a bad start. We've had one bad year and we've just jettisoned them off. And it doesn't set a good example. So for me, yes, you can argue the openers aren't good enough, but then you have to look at the wider environment. You have to look at other things. It is not just up to individuals. Cricket is a team sport, played by individuals, yes. But there's a culture, there's an environment, there's something wrong in the ECB and English cricket setup right now in Test match cricket that is producing performances like this. And we need to look at it from a wider perspective, as opposed to it's Sibley's fault, it's Crawley's fault, it's XYZ's fault. That is what I think is wrong at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting because without getting into it in a huge amount of detail, because I don't want to take up too much time discussing it because it's such a elaborate topic. But I think you've summed up pretty well in the sense that the management need to step up really and take responsibility for it. And they haven't stuck to their guns, as you said, which, you know, before, I think since the transition of Silverwood coming in for Bayliss, the way that they played cricket has been very, very different. Mm-hmm. So Silverwood has gone into this, we're going to grit out runs from the top of the order. And as you said, maybe Sibley's taken that too literally. And they've gone and said to Burns and Sibley, look, we just want you to take the shot off the new ball, which is quite an old-fashioned way of looking at it, which, you know, at times you have to do. You have to dig in, especially in English conditions. But I think India's openers in the first innings especially showed how to do it. They dug in early doors when the ball's moving around a lot, and they cashed in later on, right? And that's exactly what happened. KL Rahul and Rohit Sharma did exactly that. So that was impressive. I think Dom Sibley is someone who, yeah, it's definitely been harsh. And it's a shame that we haven't seen that kind of more free-flowing game that you mentioned for England. And I think, yeah, part of it will definitely be down to him, part of it down to the management. But if it's been going on for this long, the management clearly haven't said enough to him to say, but show us why we picked you in this side, right? Show us why, you know, what you've done for Warwickshire translates into Test match cricket. And I'm sure it does, because he's definitely scored runs, but just this year he's had a bit of a tough go. I mean, Burns was the same, right? People make fun of his technique. They say it's really weird. Then he scored 100 against New Zealand, and then it's like, okay, no one cares anymore until then, you know, he doesn't get runs anymore. So, but that gave him a little bit of a cushion, but they're always under pressure to get runs. And then Crawley, you know, I mean, yeah, I don't know, Hamid as well. Let's see how they go. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any short fix. And bringing in Dawud Malan, it looks like they'll go with Hamid and Burns, and then, you know, Malan at 3. I don't know how much that's really going to help. Yeah, or Bairstow at 3. So I don't know. We'll see how that one goes. But in terms of the rest of this Test match, though, Root's 180. I mean, what a sublime knock. And we're talking about obviously England's batting and the woes that they clearly have at the moment, but Joe Root has just been, I think we discussed this before, this is probably going to be his big year. I feel like Williamson, Smith, Kohli have always had, or they have had at least 1 year in the past where they've gone big and they've been above the rest of the pack, right, for a year. And Root, you know, when he scored that double 100 in Sri Lanka, you're like, oh, you know what? This might be the year. And then he did it in India, and he's come here, right? And there was a little bit of a drop-off for the last couple of Test matches against New Zealand, and then he's back. 180 not out in the first innings, really, really impressive. Then a 33, fine. But, I mean, how impressive was that knock?
Exceptional. Absolutely exceptional. Vintage Joe Root. And in that game as well, becoming England's second leading all-time Test run scorer. I don't know what we did to deserve Joe Root, but my goodness, am I glad to see him in an England Test shirt. He is an absolute legend of English cricket. So much class, so much poise, so much elegance, so much grace. He really is one of the best batsmen to watch in world cricket and has been for about the past 5-6 years at least. In fact, that's probably doing him a disservice. I'd say 7 or 8. He's just brilliant. He really is a master. And I feel bad for Joe Root. I really do, because he is having the year of a lifetime. He's scoring century after century. You think back to 2019 and 2020, and people were questioning his conversion rate. And all it took was one big knock, and suddenly the runs have come flowing. And deservedly so. He's been absolutely magnificent. But then again, we can't keep on relying on Joe Root. And again, if we're looking at, I don't want to keep on bringing up management and coaching, but Joe Root does seem to be the talisman of this England team. It seems to be an England team of Joe Roots, Stokes, Anderson, Broad, for example, and then the rest, when it should be a team of 11. And we should be, factoring in other people's play styles. But with regards to Joe Root, he's been absolutely brilliant. Really, really good. I mean, it's just been the year of Joe Root, hasn't it? As you said, Fies, and a bit like 2016 was the year of Kohli. It's just one of those, we'll look back on this in years to come and just think, wow, what a time to be alive and a fan of English cricket and watching Joe Root in full flow.
Yeah, I mean, he looks phenomenal. He just looks so good at the moment this year. He's been so good. It's just crazy to think about. I mean, he last year didn't score 100, and there was a lot of scrutiny under him, but he still averaged, I think, 40 odd. He's got a lot of 50s. There was this whole debate around, can he convert his 50s into 100s? His conversion rate's poor. Then he's just gone big, and he's gone really big this year. So it's good to see. On to then the second innings, right? So clearly, Anderson wasn't a big fan of Bumrah bumping him right in that first inning. So we had a little bit of a let's say rush of blood to the head, where England actually had India right at one point. They had them 175 for 6, then they had them 209 for 8, right? And then if you think they had them 209 for 8, and then India declared on 298 for 8. So that stand was ridiculous. 89 runs between Shami and Bumrah, and that's the highest score Bumrah's ever hit, and Shami actually, first 50 Shami's hit in Test match cricket. First of all, let's look at the positives. Initially, I mean, how good was the bowling from England? Because I thought they were quite good. They were tidy, I thought, early doors.
Excellent. Absolutely brilliant. You couldn't have asked for a better start, really. After seeing KL Rahul and Rohit Sharma, the amount that we praised them in the first innings, they really did apply themselves excellently. In the second innings, to get those two out early, to get Virat Kohli out for 20, was brilliant as well. And the way in which they fought back after that Pujara-Rahane partnership was exceptional. But the problem there, and it is very, very cliche, that old adage, it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. It's all well and good having India 209 for 8, but there's still 2 wickets there. And Mohammad Shami and Jasprit Bumrah really did take England to the cleaners. And you mentioned there about England's first innings and the bowling from the likes of Bumrah and Mohammad Siraj as well at James Anderson. That shouldn't have been in England's head. That shouldn't have been in there. We should not have engaged in that. Okay, these are professional cricketers. We all want to see theatrics, of course we do. But they played into India's hands there, and they took the bait, and they fell for it. And in that second innings, to have India 209 for 8 against Mohammad Shami, Jasprit Bumrah, Mohammad Siraj as a number 11, there is absolutely no way that you should be leaking 89 runs against those 3. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a tail ender. Okay, so for me, again, as a cricket lover, to see Mohammad Shami and Bumrah bat like that as a tail ender was quite entertaining. But the reason that they were given that leverage, that freedom to do that, was because of England's ill discipline. And just because India were bouncing and, bowling short length barrages at James Anderson in the first innings, doesn't mean that it's the appropriate time to do it in the second. Because the amount of balls that were just flashing off the edge and going for 4, and then we had a vacant third man at some point as well against 2 tail enders. It was, what to say, it was disorganised.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Like Anderson is, as you mentioned earlier in the video, right? Obviously picked up 5 wickets in the first innings, the master of swing, and then next thing you know, because he's been bumped a few times by Bumrah, he's like lost to the prop basically, and he's just gone. You know what? oh, you bumped me. That's it. I'm going to bump you now. And it's almost like whatever it was, the 37, 38 years of experience that this guy's had in his life just flew out, just completely got blown out the window. And he just completely lost it. And it was like, what's going on? And he came, it's almost like he went into the changing room and said to Joe Root, no, we're gonna bump them now. As soon as we get into the tail, we're gonna bump them. And it's like James Anderson isn't the type of bowler to run in and bowl bumpers effectively, because he's a skiddy swing bowler. So no wonder, right? It didn't work, because that's just not what he excels at, and that's not why he's got the amount of wickets he's got. So it was just absolutely like, it was almost like they threw the game away almost with that, to be honest with you. I know they lost by 151 runs, but I tell you what, like, if that score had been whatever it was, 89 runs shorter, they would have been a lot more confident going into that chase, and it would have been like they lost a lot of momentum, I think, in the back end of that second innings of India. So that was just a real shame. And I don't know what you think. Obviously, there's a lot of criticism on Joe Root's captaincy for employing those tactics, but surely as well, and look, I think rightly so, we talk about how good Anderson is. But if you look at the rest of the group in this Test match, they had Ollie Robinson, who's very young, very new to Test cricket. Mark Wood, again, like pretty inexperienced in Test cricket. Anyway, still Sam Curran as well. And then they had Moeen Ali, right, who's a spinner. So, and Moeen's not going to say to James Anderson, what are you doing? I mean, he's probably just going to be like, he's not the type of person to do that. He's not confrontational. So surely, right, there has to be some responsibility, not just on Joe Root, but on James Anderson, who's supposed to be the experienced head, to say, look, you guys have contributed to the loss of this match, right? Yeah, you scored 180, Joe Root. Yes, you got a 5 for Anderson, so I understand that. But you set it up for potentially a draw or win, and you've just thrown it away, basically. Is that a fair comment?
Well, they did. But again, it comes back to accountability in this England side, which I don't feel like in these big games they're necessarily doing as a team. If you notice at the end of that game, after scoring 180, and yes, he did make some mistakes with the captaincy, Joe Root lost his cool. But he was the only one to face up to the media exactly after the game. Joe Root, the man who has literally put England in a potential winning position. The bowlers didn't come. Chris Silverwood didn't come. There were no other answers. It was all on Joe Root. Joe Root had to front up and take responsibility and bore all the brunt. In terms of the responsibility for those actions in the second innings, again, it's multiple people. It's a team sport. You can blame Root's captaincy. You can blame Anderson's bowling. You can blame the English bowlers for losing their discipline. But again, it's multiple people. And they should have to acknowledge that and accept it moving on into the rest of this series. It wasn't Root's fault. It wasn't Anderson's fault. It wasn't the team's fault. It was every single one of their faults for allowing it to get to that stage. Because you've literally got India on the ropes. You said it right there, Faizan. There's a massive difference between chasing 190 runs and 271. Okay, it doesn't matter what level of cricket you're playing at. Certainly in village cricket, that would be immense, let alone Test cricket. So it was on all of them. And again, it comes back to this lack of acknowledgement that it's not just up to one player to take the responsibility. Joe Root has shoulders a lot on his shoulders this year. With the bat, with the captaincy, he is pretty much holding this team together by the skin of his teeth. And I don't know how he's doing it. It's absolutely remarkable how Joe Root is putting England in these winning positions anyway. But to then put him in front of the Sharks, I suppose, the media, the fans, put him under all the scrutiny at the end of the game, again, I think it is poor. And it comes back to management. And as you can tell, it's a theme in today's show. I'm not best pleased with how this England side is being managed. And the man who needs to come out and actually accept responsibility and tell us with clarity and with, with some assurance is Chris Silverwood. And he's not doing it. So it's just one of those. It's one of those. And a very, very disappointing performance in the end from an English perspective. But again, fair play to India. They outplayed us on day 5. So be it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was, and it's interesting because they always talk about the psychological factor of when you get past 200, right? And it's crazy because the difference between 197 and 201 is only 4 runs, but psychologically it does play quite a bit. And as someone who, I don't know, as someone who just plays like league cricket for me, it plays a big difference. Like it makes a huge difference when you're chasing as a batsman. So I think England, it was just a missed opportunity for sure. And then going into that second innings, I mean, they're probably thinking, how the heck have we just let Shami and Bumrah basically bludgeon their way to this 89-run partnership? I think Bumrah, one of the first fours he hit was him trying to pull the ball, and he ended up cutting it for 4. Like he was caught so much unawares, and it was just incredible. But yeah, just crazy, absolutely crazy. But for England, then, I mean, the batting display was just a capitulation, wasn't it? I mean, this pretty much epitomized, I think, England's batting. I mean, bowled up for 120, and where they really needed. Look, I mean, if Chris Silwood, right, he's trying to advocate this gritty type of play, I guess, in this England side, and they're not showing that, and they're also not showing an expressive side to their game either. So at the moment, it's basically like nothing. They're in nothingness at the moment, England at the moment, and that's exactly what happened, because they just got absolutely cleaned up. Mohammad Siraj, obviously, there was a lot of fire around. The Indians were not happy with Bumrah getting bounced, and Kohli was on the balcony cheering, and there was a lot of, let's say, fiery words being said. I think Joss Butler said something behind the stumps, which is really uncharacteristic of him, and I think he should never talk like that because he just sounds ridiculous when he does it. But it was getting a bit like, okay, guys, like relax. And yeah, it was heated to say the least. And it just all came to a head, and it's almost like England hadn't listened or hadn't seen Tim Payne do exactly the same thing to Ravi Ashwin, right? In that series. And then they didn't learn from the Gabba, and they thought, well, let's just do exactly the same thing here at Lord's. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, the Indian display, let's touch upon Siraj first. 8 wickets in the match, and he's someone who, look, again, right, he is someone who wasn't the first choice. He came into that Australia series as like a B, C player, right, in terms of like string. I mean, how good has he been?
Well, he's extraordinary. And I've seen him for multiple teams, of course. For those who know, I'm an RCB fan. The amount of natural swing he generates with a white ball is incredibly impressive. It really is. You're as IPL fans remember, 3 for 8 against Kolkata Knight Riders in Abu Dhabi last year. Absolutely exceptional. Swinging that ball all over the place, in particular in his first 2 overs. And for those who've seen him in the Ranji Trophy as well for Hyderabad, he does the exact same thing. He is such a natural swing artist, so skilled, so adept with the new ball. He really is, but also able to swing the old ball as well. He's just got this natural gift for the red cricket ball. And in this game, absolutely extraordinary. Really good to both the right and the left-handers, both over and around the wicket. And he's been a brilliant find. He really has been a brilliant find. To think, without all of those problems on that Australia tour, he may have never even played a test for India. And yet they've actually found an absolute diamond in the form of Mohammad Siraj. He's absolutely brilliant. I can't really praise him enough, to be honest. He's been a revelation since coming into that Indian seam battery. And I'll tell you what, for world cricket right now, this is genuinely quite scary, this India team. Because the India team of the 90s, the 2000s, even the early 2010s had some good seamers. For example, the likes of Zahir Khan in the late 2000s, absolutely fantastic. But they didn't have 4 or 5 of them at the same time. India right now have Bumrah, Shami, Ishant Sharma as well. What a story he's been coming back into the India fold. You got Mohammad Siraj as well. It's absolutely brilliant. Shardul Thakur's another one. Just a very natural, naturally gifted seam bowler. These really are golden years for Indian Test cricket. They really are. And fair play to them for all of the criticism that we've said about England. You cannot take away from the performance of those Indian bowlers, or indeed the batsmen. The likes of Pujara, Rahane, Rahul, Sharma as well. And then, of course, those seam bowlers were exceptional. And that is why India won this game. They kept their heads over the course of all 5 days and played the better cricket.
Yeah, agreed. The last thing I'm going to ask you about this test match is, little bit controversial because obviously India won by 151 runs even. But do you think, obviously Pujara got 45 and Rahane 61 in that second innings, so good little knocks for them. Kohli got 42 in the first one. So, some kind of runs, but, nothing, hugely substantial, let's say, from that 3, 4, 5 that there's been a lot of question marks about, in terms of question marks in the sense that they haven't really fired on all cylinders. Do you think it's papered over the cracks a little bit to that middle order, or is it a bit harsh to say that? I mean, Kohli's never going to get dropped, we know that, and he will come good at some point. But I think maybe Pujara especially, because there was a lot of scrutiny, right, that he was being put under, especially after the first innings. They were like, look, he's pretty much on borrowed time. And then the 45, it seems to have put those critics to bed a little bit. But himself and obviously Rahane then getting 61 helped him as well. Do you think it's just delaying the inevitable, or is it, there's no reason to feel doom and gloom about it as an Indian fan?
It's an interesting question, isn't it, Faizan? Because imagine those averages and imagine those batting performances in an England shirt. We'd be having a completely different conversation. We would. It's as simple as that. And that is the difference between a winning team and a losing team. Players get put under the microscope a lot more. In terms of those three in this test match, I don't think they necessarily hit the heights that we used to, in particular Virat Kohli. Still waiting on that century. It's a matter of time. I've said this and I'll continue to say this. Virat Kohli's too good a player to not get that 71st century. It's a matter of when, not if. With Pujara, again, a bit like Sibley, I mean, the guy's just put under unnecessary pressure, in my opinion. Some people don't like the way in which he bats, but he really is a vital cog in this Indian batting arsenal. He really is. And whether people like him or not, that's absolutely fine. Again, you're entitled to your opinion. But when Cheteshwar Pujara digs in and frustrates an opposition bowling lineup, like he did in this test match, he's one of the most valuable players in that entire Indian outfit. So Pujara, yes, he does need some more runs. But I'll tell you what, if this gets his confidence back, we see some 80 plus, 100 plus scores, you've got to think that his long-term future is probably set for at least the next, I'd say the next iteration of the championship. With Rahane, again, we all know what Ajinkya Rahane is capable of. Brilliant batsman, very free-flowing, very graceful, very, very nice to watch as a fan. But again, he needs some runs. And another thing that I will say about Rahane, he needs to stop trying to run himself out. He's taken up the Ross Taylor school of running between the wickets, which is very, very worrying. I mean, the amount of times he almost ran himself out with Pujara was, I think, in the double digits. The amount of times that we are seeing shies at the stumps. But again, there is that old saying, form is temporary, class is permanent. And with three guys like that, of course, Virat Kohli, one of the best to ever play the game, but with prolific, experienced players in Cheteshwar Pujara and Ajinkya Rahane, if this does kickstart something for those two and they find some form, I think we'll see them for the long term. If not, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You can talk about the likes of Shubman Gill, Hanuma Vihari, for example, but for the time being, I do think India will probably be patient with those three.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when they're winning, it's very difficult to just say, we're going to drop you. So unless there's a real dip in form, right, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 ducks in a row or something, then it's going to be quite hard to do that for sure. That's all, I think, for the first test match review. Thank you very much, Aaron, for being on. I do appreciate it. I know that it's probably a bitter pill for you to swallow, and I know you've passionately talked about it, though, about obviously Dom Sibley and the treatment. I think rightly so as well. So hopefully England don't get stuffed 4-0, like you said, but we shall see. Thank you very much, guys, though, for tuning in. Please do check out Aaron on all the best, of course, podcast platforms as well. It's the County Cricketer. Go and check him out. He's also on Twitter as well and has some fantastic stuff on there as well. Thank you very much, Aaron, and thank you, everyone.